The fifth of the 10 commandments, and just as a reminder, this is maybe the third time I'm saying this, that we say in the Protestant paradigm, we have the list of commandments there, and it's kind of different and enumerated differently than the Catholics. It's not enumerated at all in the scriptures. That's the trick. But the Jews regard this commandment as, we say the first 4 commandments are divine commandments having to do with a relation with God. And the last 6 commandments are divine commandments having to do with a relation with God. And the last 6 have to do with our relationship with man. That's how we teach it in Sunday school. It's probably how you've heard it. But the Jews teach themselves in this way. I thought this was fascinating to find this out months ago. That they cut it in half, and they say the first group, so that the 10 commandments in their teaching is even cut. 5 on one side, 5 on the other. And you say, well, isn't mother and father human beings and not divine? And they say, the mother and the father are like the image of God and the people of God, mother, father, and children. And so when you cross the parents, well, of course we see it seriously too, but the way they teach it is you're crossing God's image when you do that. So that's just like very interesting as we take on So that's just like very interesting as we take on the first. We say in Protestant ethic, the first of the 6 commandments that have to do with man. While the Jews say, no, this is still having to do with divine transgression. Exodus 20:12, just one single verse. And will you read it with me out loud? Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. Because it's so short, let's say it one more time. Think about the words. Ready? Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be giving you. Thank you, Steve. I find that there's a very interesting verse in the Paul's epistle to the Ephesians, which was designed to be a circular letter. In other words, it wasn't written only to the Ephesians, or at least the church took it that was written to the Ephesians, or at least the church took it that was written to the Ephesians and took it around to the various churches. And so he's writing to Gentiles. And specifically in Ephesus, he's writing to Greeks. And even more specifically, I'm going to quote you a verse. And even more specifically, I'm going to quote you a verse. In the 6th chapter, he's talking, because the letter was read to the churches, he's talking for a microsecond to the children of the Christian families in the church of Ephesus. And he says, I just obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Then he quotes in the 2nd verse, honor your father and mother. And now most of the versions, this is true in the NIV, the ESV, the NASB, the KJV. It's not true for the RSV and the Holman Christian edition. Most of the translations will put parentheses. Honor your father and mother. And then it says in parentheses, this is the first commandment with a promise. And that's easy to just glide over. With a promise. And that's easy to just glide over. But just to highlight this, what promise? And the promise is there. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may land that the Lord your God is giving you. Now, I'm probably not scholarly enough to make this smooth. I find this interesting because he's quoting the 10 Commandments, and he's telling it's based on honor your father and mother, and he says this is the first commandment with a promise, and he points to the promise in the 10 Commandments. Now, there's a way to read well And there's a way to read well, and we call this textualism. That's a scholarly term for how to read. And we do this in our Christian churches. We really do it in law and medicine, but it's really important when you're teaching your child. To read the words that are there. The words mean something. And so you read the words and you take the words for what they mean, and then you take the phrases, and you learn this in elementary school, how to understand the different phrases, and you're trying to. And then furthermore, in Christian biblical textualism, we also say it is very important to look at the context in which that meaning sits, so that the context now kind of protects the intended meaning of the sentence. I'm making up a word now. There's a group of people in the world of my mind that I would call hyper-textualists. In the scriptures. And what I mean by that is they'll say, and this is actually an adage that you've maybe heard in your churches, when the plain sense makes common sense, seek no other sense. And sometimes you need to ask, well, who created that law? What authority is behind that law? Because that authority is telling us how to read the Bible, which we're saying is a supreme authority. And so you have a kind of hyper-textualist will stick so much to the meaning of the text that there's the meaning, is the words, the phrases, that's what it is. And look at the context, and there it is. And the hyper-textualist says it can mean no other thing. That's what the hyper-textualist says. And mostly that's true. Sometimes in the Bible, there's something else going on. And so I'm just bringing this to your attention, not even what I'm preaching on here, but just to say, when Paul is quoting 10 Commandments, and he tells the children, the parents who are listening, this is the first commandment with a promise. A hyper-textualist would say, I'm looking at that promise right there, and I know that it is spoken to the Jews, and to the Jews alone, that your days may be long in the land, and that land is Canaan, that land is Palestine. Biblical linguistics to basically say it pertains to Ephesians, who are Greeks, who will never go to Palestine. And I'm watching Paul. That says, this is the first commandment with the promise. Now the hypertext, this is the first commandment with the promise. Now the hypertext is not being right. I just need to tell you that I'm preaching, believing, and so this is an inference, hold this with a lighter hand, believing that Paul is finding profound application for Gentile families who will never go to Palestine, that promise is true for them in some sense, because he just quoted it and wants them to hear it. So I take this preacher is taking it that it carries a divine help for us and a blessing for us, that the long life that we have, the days that are numbered, will carry with it a favor of God that will prosper our ways, in some sense. So I'm preaching it in that way. So my aim this morning, listen carefully, my aim this morning is to do what the title says, for you to think about real people. Honor real people. Honor your father. Honor your mother. Listen one more time. Honor your father and your mother. My aim is to help us to think about where we fall short because of our flesh, because of our pain, because of our circumstances. And the Word of God is telling us, is pointing us to bring honor to those who have been above us in the Lord. Some of your parents are dead. I'll talk to that before I is to you. But I am aware now, as I move into this meditation, I'm aware that the things that I may say are not explicit from the Scriptures. So I'm flagging that for you from the Scriptures. So I'm flagging that for you in the way that Paul does this in the Scriptures. Paul's actually, in 1 Corinthians 10, he's writing about single people. And in that passage in 1 Corinthians 7, he goes from single people to divorce. And he's talking to all this pain that happens in families. And he says a couple things in the 12th verse and in the 40th verse. He says, I'm speaking, but not the Lord. It's like, what? That says all Scripture is inspired by God, comes from the Lord, and profitable for all Scripture is inspired by the Lord. So I find this very interesting that he has an apostolic sense that the topic that he's on, he has a lesser certainty that what he's about to say actually comes directly from the Lord. And so he's flagging it for the church, and he's from the Lord. And so he's flagging it for the church, and he's gingerly walking. He wants them not to be confused. If I say something wrong, it's me, not God. And then he says in the 20th verse, as he's talking about women whose husband dies, he thinks it would be better for them to remain as she is rather than to get married. And then he says, but I think that I also have the Spirit of the Lord. In other words, you can see him just trying to help by being not insistent. And so this morning, with my words on God's explicit command, what's happening here? God. Can I walk away? Okay. I'm stuck on the cross. This is great. This is great. Thank you. Yeah. So because I'm very conscious in this message that I'm not speaking directly from the Scriptures, I want us to be in the Scriptures. And so I want to take the next few moments, and I do this at the beginning of the week, and I want you to take a shower with the beginning of the week. And I want you to take a shower with the Word of God that is very explicit. So I'm just going to read verses, hodgepodge, about relationship of parents to children, children to parents, commands, injunctions, blessings, curses. It's a hodgepodge to me in these moments, and I'm just reading for you various points of Scripture without trying to fit them into a pattern. We're just taking a shower with God's Word here for the next few moments. And I'm going to start here by reading 10 verses in the Proverbs. 10 verses in the Proverbs. Not all that I have, but I want to start with these 10 verses. Proverbs begin. This is the first verse I memorized in the Proverbs. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. So it's like, you better listen to me, because we need to fear the Lord when I open my mouth. And then he goes on to say, hear, my Lord, when I open my mouth. And then he goes on to say, hear, my son, your father's instruction, and forsake not your mother's teaching, for they are a graceful garland for your head and pendants for your neck. What I get out of this verse is that a verse, and I think it's a section that goes all the way through at least chapter 6, that the Word of God is coming, divinely inspired through the Spirit, through the paradigm of a father. Son says, hear, my son, my instruction. Listen to me. The son can't hear unless the father instructs. And the father can't instruct unless the father talks. Hear, hear, my son, the instruction of your father. Don't you forsake your mother's teaching. And this is repeated in Proverbs 6:20. My son. So that's why I think there's a whole section in the Proverbs where perhaps Solomon talking to Rehoboam, I don't know, maybe talking to Solomon, talking to Rehoboam, I don't know, maybe talking to Solomon, there's a father-son relationship somewhere, and he's giving these instructions to all of us because of the Spirit of God, but particularly in his mind to his son. He says, my son, keep your father's commandment and forsake not your mother's teaching. Makes a glad father, but a foolish man despises his mother. Proverbs 19:26 says, he who does violence to his father and chases away his mother is a son. It's shame and reproach. Proverbs 20. If one curses his father or his mother, his lamp will be put out in utter darkness. Put out in utter darkness. That verse shot cold water through my veins with my son. And he's drunk addiction years. Proverbs 23:22. Father, listen to your father who gave you life. Do not despise your mother when she is old. Proverbs 23:25. Let your mother and your father be glad. Let her who bore you rejoice. And if there were kids here, I'd say, your mother is old and she just loves, she just rejoices because of the family. Proverbs 28:24. Whoever robs his father or his mother and says, what's the deal? Literally, what's the deal? Literally, there's no transgression. But you know, what's the deal? So is a companion to a man who destroys. The father should know that. This is why there's a severe consequence. Because you're really close. You're really close to the sixth commandment. Proverbs 29:15. The rod and reproof give wisdom, but a child left to himself brings shame to his mother. Proverbs 30. Text. The hypertextualist will have trouble with this verse, but he'll fudge and realize it's a metaphor. The eye that mocks a father and scorns to obey a mother will be picked out by the ravens of the valley and eaten by the vultures. You know, it's not designed to be literally true because there's tons of guys that mock their father and scorn their mother, and I don't see any birds hovering over them. But it's a metaphor. It's to say, you're a dead man. You're a dead man and good for nothing but the birds of the air to eat. When you're like that and you mock your father and you scorn your mother. I mean, this is kind of heavy. When you're like that and you mock your father and you scorn your mother. I mean, this is kind of heavy. I'm jumping now to a little bit more hodgepodge before I get going with some of my thoughts. This one's more cold water through your veins. If a man, in Deuteronomy 21, and so the law is actually repeated, the Ten Commandments are repeated in Deuteronomy 5 as we're getting ready after 40 years to go into Canaan. So this is Moses speaking to his people following 40 years in the desert going into the promised land. If any man has a stubborn and rebellious son who will not obey his father or his mother, I'm glad you're free from the law. Then his father and mother shall seize him and bring him out to the elders of his city at the gateway of his hometown. And they shall say to the elders of his city, this son of ours is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey us. He's a glutton. And son of ours is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey us. He's a glutton and a drunkard. Then all the men of his city shall stone him to death. So you shall remove the evil from your midst, and all Israel shall hear of it and fear. I know. I'm so glad we're not under the law. Jesus became a curse for us, that we don't have to do this. But nevertheless, we should read this and go, what is going on with me when I did that to my parents, or my child when they're doing that to me? It's like there should be this trepidation, like God's like this. Just a few more verses. I find this interesting that this is in the Bible, Ephesians 6:4, after he has said, children, obey your parents. This is right, honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with a promise. The fathers, so he softens this for the kids. Do not provoke your children to kids. Do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. There's a class of Christians that exists. It's like, don't provoke your children to anger. Show them how angry God is at you. And it's like, I don't read it that way. It's like, I don't read it that way. And the word discipline is like, oh, slam them. Let God slam them. It's like, no. God disciplines us like sons. And he gives us direct words. He brings conviction. And he's God of love. And so bring them the telling him that comes from God when he loves his creatures. So don't provoke your children to anger, but have another environment in your home. And he says it's virtually the same thing in Colossians 3. Fathers, do not exasperate your children, that they may not lose heart. Hebrews 12 says, furthermore, we had earthly fathers to discipline us, and we respected them. That's a good thing. Shall we not much rather be subject to the Father of spirits and live? So he's basically saying, you learned how to be subject. So he's basically saying, you learned how to be subject to your parents who were disciplining you. That's practice. For you should be taking your practice and now walking with God who disciplines us in the fear of the Lord. I just two more verses here, move on. And these are metaphors in the Bible about the parent-child relationship. So we're not teaching about the parent-child relationship. We're taking of that and applying it to something else. Here's one. Do not sharply rebuke an older man as to a father, and the younger men as brothers, the older women as mothers, and the younger women as sisters in all purity. So Paul is basically saying, and pal around with everybody and slap them on the back and treat everybody equally, but not everybody's equal. In fact, when you find an older man, there should be respect that you don't give to the younger. But with the younger, you treat them like brothers. And the older women, the kindness that you show like to your mother. Like, wow. Here's one more. Here for this third time, says Paul in 2 Corinthians 12, here for the third time, I'm ready to come to you, and this is the apostle talking to church people. Big apostle. Apostle talking to church people. Big apostle. Little church. Here for the third time, I'm ready to come to you, and I will not be a burden to you. For I do not seek what's yours. In other words, I'm not here among you to get from you. I see modern, my gosh, the whole thing is trained for dig into your pockets and give to the thing that goes to the apostle. He's saying the opposite. He's saying, I will not be a burden to you, for I don't seek what you have, but I'm seeking you. For children are not parents, but parents for their children. People will walk away from this and go, man, I need to save up for my kids. But that's not what it's teaching. What it's teaching is that there's this apostolic relationship that Paul has with the church, and he's really trying to say, I don't get from you, church, and he's really trying to say, I don't get from you, I don't benefit from you, you benefit from me, like a child to a father. And I just find that the biblical apostle is the modern day apostle on its head. Hustle on its head in reverse. I just find that fascinating now that he's using family things in the church to help us operate like unto family. Okay, well, those are explicit from the scripture now, and just sharing with you that my father was born in poverty. He was the son of an immigrant in Cuba, and his parents were a mother who was a Spaniard and a father who was an Englishman, and somehow, in ways that I can't trace it anymore, somehow the family moved to California. And then when we last pick up, my father's father, being raised in Cuba by an uncle. And so my grandfather now immigrates from Cuba to Weehawken in Hoboken, New Jersey side of New York City. My father was poor when I brought to New York City. Those very still go. And he worked on it. And my father had one sister, and his parents were poor. They lived in a little section of Hoboken called the Shades, which is now gone. But the lowland from it's right on the water level, and they're just poor houses back in the day. My father, when he was born with spinal epiphysitis, which to my father's description, that's like your backbone. There's something soft in it, and it bends in a way it bends in a way that it shouldn't. And so all his life, all his growing up years, he wore a brace. And so when my father was drafted into the Korean War, he went in to have a medical evaluation for receiving, and he took off his brace and threw it aside and went in and passed the physical and served. That's my dad. My dad was a man who wanted to do the right things, and he did not have simple draftsman in a shipyard in Hoboken. He eventually became vice president without a college degree. How did he do that? And he actually emulated something I've told my dad this. I've never seen this. But my dad, I've never seen this. But my dad, when he became vice president to the president and the owner of the company, George Steinbrenner, who owned the Yankees, and my dad served the president in a way that I told my dad, I've not seen this in the military, I've not seen it in business, I've not seen it in the church. But you were an assist to the president, and yet you had this collegial, brotherly relationship with Ralph and Sonny, they were like brothers. And that, I have not seen that work out, even in the church of God, where we're all supposed to be brothers. That has really impacted my psyche. My father raised 4 boys. I'm the first of 4 boys. We grew up in a 10-story tenement in New Jersey. We didn't have 2 pennies to scratch together, but I didn't think I was poor. I thought I was fine. I just was happy, and eventually the shipyard moves from Hoboken to Galveston, Texas, and my dad is slowly being advanced through the years, and at some point in my teenage years, my dad started doing a prototype work with the ships that he devised and create super tankers and irregular tankers. And so there was this massive project that was over decades of doing this in the shipyard. My dad became a workaholic. And I remember the change. My dad was strong straight and moral and religious. The workaholic thing starts happening is that religion pops away. And he doesn't sing in Mass anymore. And then he starts to come home and he sits in his lazy chair. And he was stressed out, but I didn't know he was stressed out. I just knew my dad is a really hard worker. He was stressed out. I just knew my dad is a really hard worker. I have a brother who's younger than me, 1 year younger. I was kind of the moral goody two-shoes son. My brother was the hurricane. He was the mischievous guy. And my brother, under the workaholic years of my father, now I'm finding this out in these years. He says, Michael, Dad abused me. Well, what do you mean? He would take a belt and he would just whip and he'd be really angry. And he'd say, don't let me ever see you. You know, kind of like that. Now, I didn't see that with my father. And so I have a brother I have memories of my dad in the good years. And then I have my memory of my dad in the harder years. And then my brother and I have different memories that have made different impacts on us. The brother who's 5 years younger is now losing the visual of the good side of my dad and just sees the lazy chair of my dad, and so there's no chair of my dad, and so there's no real relationship with him. Yet my brother, 5 years younger than me, retains a morality about him, while the one who's 13 years younger never saw the good part and always saw the rough part or the nonchalant part, the lazy chair part. And to this day, my 13-year-old is in assisted living with memory issues. And here's why I'm sharing this with you. I've got more to share. I won't. Here's why I'm doing this. Is I kind of want you to be thinking, oh, that's why Michael is the way he is. I'm hoping that there's a brain cell in there that's popping those kinds of things because that's right. We are in humanity made in the image of God. Meanwhile, He gives the parents an ability to make kids in their image. That's incredible. But the image is always a mixture. Of good and bad, salt and pepper, black and white, noble and ignoble. I mean, when you got that commandment there, it's given not in the Garden of Eden. It's not, God didn't say to Adam and Eve, now when you have kids, that the kids honor you. He didn't say it in the garden. He said it after the wrath of God to be revealed against all ungodliness and unrighteousness, all men who suppress the truth and unrighteousness, Romans 1. And he waits to sin is just exploding. God picks a people from all the sinners and makes them, and they're in the desert and they're complaining, and He gives them His commandment. And He says, honor your father and mother, knowing that the parents are mixtures at best of good and bad, salt and pepper, black and white. So that's the point that I'm trying to bring to you, is that salt and pepper, black and white. So that's the point that I'm trying to bring to you, is that your parents and you who are parents are these strange mixtures in your parenting of the good and the bad. But for you who have been shaped by your parents, here's the other point I want to say, are not exact and accurate with objective fact. This weekend that I had with midshipmen, now officers, retired, was fascinating. And my first roommate, nuclear submariner, went on to become an HR in the same class within the same company at the Naval Academy. And there are other classes of men, so that there was 30 of us, and 30 of them, and 30 of them, and 30 of them. So about 120 in each company. And I'm with the 30. We all went through the same, we wore the same clothes, the same experiences, ate the same food at the same time, saw the same people, heard the same conversations, and then they sit by and they talk about, do you remember when Midshipman Brown rolled down there and did this? And the guy next to him goes, oh, no. That wasn't brown. No, no. That wasn't brown. That was Schmidt. And to watch this is fascinating. Well, the other one, well, okay, it was Schmidt, but that thing changed my life because of the fear of God that went into me. The other guy says, I don't know, I don't even remember that. And this is true of our humanity, is that we don't judge with accurate judgment or a truly objective judgment. Neither do we remember the things that cause those judgments to happen. That we all bring to the table our own biases and our prejudices and our experiences, and somehow we go through the same thing at the same time with the same people, and everything's the same, and we come out with differences like this. And so he's talking to me about this as we're watching it in the room. And all that to say, the way you understand your parents, you don't have the whole thing. And this is to press on you the invitation to really work on forgiving. Remember, is abuse, blackness, wrongdoing, bad decisions, stuff that has impacted you and changed your life. Consider that you brought a lot of that to the table and foisted it. Truthful as you feel, I remember it so well. I think this is just a phenomenon that I'm comparing notes with other guys, and I'm just saying, your kids will remember you, probably not objectively. Where there's need for forgiveness, not objectively. Where there's need for forgiveness, if I were you, I would work on establishing a softer environment with your children, so that the stuff that they hold against you, if it's holding something against you, that can be worked through. I have 4 statements. I'll try to be brief on these. And again, I'm aware that this is not explicitly scriptural, so hold it in your head, weigh it against what you know of the scriptures, and go. Honoring your father, statement number 1, honoring your father and mother begins in the early stages of our lives, in infancy and toddlerhood, by learning how to submit to them in entire obedience. And you got that? That honoring is not the same as obeying them. But as Ephesians 6 says, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. And he says, honor your father and mother. Now, parents in the Lord, for this is right. And he says, honor your father and mother. Now, obeying is not the same. But learning how to honor your parents begins, before you can even put sentences together, by learning in your little baby frame how to obey entirely submissively to your parents. I mean, one of the first challenges that when I've walked through this 5 times, I go, okay, this is how to do it. But at the first time challenge, you don't know. It's how do you take that baby from not sleeping in your bed alongside Bob or in the bassinet, in the master bedroom, how do you take it into its own room and go to sleep, and I'm not going to come in after you? How? And that's the first ouch for a parent. And now I've learned to say to my kids, my own kids, if you want that to happen, you just have to learn to invest in what I call hell night. Hell night is, you've been talking to the judge, you're a good little man on yourself. And you've been talking to the judge, you're a good little man on yourself. And mommy and daddy, I'm going to come in and give you something to eat, and you're like, ready? And you talk about that. Then you go circle the date. This is hell night. And then you lay the child down and you go to bed. You know what happens. You know what happens. And the parent can tell. The parent can tell when that cry is not a cry of desperation and fright. It's a cry of, I want this! And then you have to learn to just lay there and let them go and do this. You got both of them. You got to go to work in the morning, and it's like, oh, we don't have time for this. So the temptation is always to put the child back in the bed and then tend to it and that kind of thing. And if you don't do that in their little frame, you're retarding their progress in learning how to obey. You're retarding their progress in learning how to obey entirely submissively without resistance. So the next thing you do is eat your vegetables, and you got that. So we had a favorite book that I would read to the kids. I couldn't remember the title. It was like 2 syllables. Dum dum eat your peas. Dum dum eat your peas. What's that? I found it later. It was muskrat. Eat your peas. A little muskrat doesn't like peas. And the parent would say, muskrat, eat your peas. And you know, father, the big animals, oh, I don't like peas. And so they would say, peas are great, peas are wonderful, peas will help you. And I don't like peas. And so they came around and going, muskrat, eat your spaghetti. And you can only tell by the illustration that spaghetti has lots of peas. And so the purpose was, you will eat your peas. We will find a way to do it incrementally. And so I'm looking for the book because I go, eat your peas. What is that? And so I type into the Google, eat your peas. And I go, there's a spray of books about training kids to eat their peas. I could not believe about training kids to eat their peas. I could not believe this. I could not believe this. So this one's called Daisy, Eat Your Peas. I go, okay, I'm going to teach Daisy how to eat her peas. And so I did, Daisy, eat your peas. And she says, I don't like peas. And so I'm just reading a couple lines from this book. Mom sighed, one of her usual sighs, some pudding, said Mom. And the story goes on, but I don't like peas. So Mom says, if you eat your peas, you can have some pudding, and you can stay up for an extra half hour. And the story just keeps escalating until it comes to the end. I don't like peas. If you eat your peas, that's full of puddings. You never have to go to bed ever again or school again. You never have to wash or brush your hair or clean your shoes or tidy your bedroom. I'll buy you a bike shop, a zoo, 10 chocolate factories. I'll take you to Superland for a week and you can have your very own space rocket and double retro laser blasters. I'll buy you the Earth, the Moon, the stars. Space rocket and double retro laser blasters. I'll buy you the Earth, the Moon, the stars, the sun, and what in the world is this? And she says, you really want me to eat peas, don't you? And she says, yes, I do. And she says, but you don't eat your broccoli. I'll eat my peas if you eat your broccoli. And the mother says, I don't like broccoli. And the book ends with, they're eating pudding together. And I go, this is what's wrong with this generation. Is that we're not training our child to obey obediently. We're telling them at the earliest stage. I looked at the cover of the book, teaching our youngest children to negotiate for their rights. It's like, this is nonsense. And so if you don't do this, you retard your child from learning how to obey. So here's the second point. I'll do the three quickly. Is that eventually, submitting in total obedience morphs. It's supposed to morph. It's supposed to change. It's supposed to end. Therefore, a father and mother a person shall leave his father and mother, cleave to his, you leave them. And leave his father and mother, cleave to his, you leave them. And you leave the modality of having to live, doing everything that they say and the way that they say it. That should happen. But honor should never happen. Honor gets hatched out of obeying. And so, and they don't live honoring their parents because they haven't learned how to submit. They don't honor their teachers. They don't honor their bosses. They don't honor their government. I'm trying to paint a picture for you that you can see that our generation has created Frankensteins. It's not the younger generation who's primarily at fault. We have done this. And so eventually it's supposed to end so that you can graduate to honoring. It's end so that you can graduate to honoring. And so one of the things you should help your children, your grandchildren do, Paul, is when they get to that age, they don't have to live under strict obedience anymore. You should be talking about how to honor your parents, your mother, how to do that without obeying. So I learned as a Christian, visit my parents just once every several years, because I'm either in the Navy or overseas. When I visit, I take my mother on a date. Has anyone ever done this? To take their mother on a date. I didn't know what I was going to do. I just wanted to sit down and buy a meal and talk to my mom. My mom thought I was the greatest thing. And with your father, you just go camping, or you do bowling, or you do stuff camping, or you do bowling, or you do stuff because a slight reversal is happening over the decades. Your child is rising to the top of ability, and you're shrinking in ability. In the end, I'm going to go to our last statement. In the end, when we obey our parents and learn honor, when we learn honor to our family, then we have the skills to the ones who feed us and clothe us and pay for us and care for us and love us. But we have the skills and we know how to honor them. And when you don't have the skills, you mess up in all those forums of life that where you have to answer up to somebody. Now I'm watching the younger generation do that right now. And even in politics, we're just shucking off all people. And even the ones who need to retire because they're old, it's being done dishonorably. It's really very, very sad. In the end, once you learn honor, and you're skilled at honoring your boss and your teacher and your coach and all those people in authority in your life, and you learn how to do that, in the end, you take the skills of submission and the skills exactly to learn how to do both and toggle them according to the situation. Even there's Christian men who are complementarian and believe that the husband is the head of the home. I do too. I believe that. I don't even say head of the home. I go with the Bible. The husband's the head of the wife. But there are not. They lose the fact that the Bible that says you're the head of the wife. You need to be in submission to each other. And the Bible's talking out of both sides of the tongue. Why? Because we need to learn how to toggle. True life is learning your situation and where am I and where are they, and you learn to go, okay, right now, and where am I and where are they, and you learn to go, okay, right now, I'm in submission. I know how to be a happy one in submission to this, and now I know how to execute and lead. And the wife has to learn how to do that as well. You read Proverbs 31, there's leadership, executiveship all over that chapter. And knobheads in the conservative end of Protestantism bang on their chest to say the husband is the head of the wife, head of the husband home, and you don't have the sense that when we do life, I learn to submit to my wife because I think she learns to execute and be in charge of certain things, and that is not becoming a woman. So we learn how to do this, and then we come to the church where there's lots of people, and we learn how to submit. We learn how to execute. All of us to submit. We learn how to execute. All of us. All of us. It's not that I'm the executive and you're the submissive people in the pew. It's not that. It's that we're brothers and sisters in a family. And when we have a task and someone is in charge, and Bob is like, I'm on the team. I serve Bob, and I'm under him. What do you want me to do, Bob? That kind of thing. I think we're losing that in our culture. It's always like King Kong if you have a leader. And I'm frightened for our country as we move into November, because I think there's this anything. But at the same token, they want someone who will really fix the deal. And both parties have a King Kong in their own ways. It's like, is this the way we're to be a collective people? So, honor. 5 minutes of talk. And I've got questions there. I'm just going to end right now at my non-ending point. So, give me the questions, and I'll give you 5 minutes to say, what thoughts did you have? Or I'm rambling in ways that I'm